here to discuss what is a serious national security threat. Former DEA and DOJ agent Steve Peterson. Steve, also vice president of the National Law Enforcement Speakers Bureau. He earned the nickname Batman. He joins us from what we could call the Batmobile, his van parked safely somewhere on the streets of Charlotte, North Carolina. Steve, you heard Harry Reid. Do you agree with his assessment? Are our borders safe?
Well, I think Harry Reid is absolutely correct. The borders are secure. Of course, I assume he's speaking of the borders of Nevada, something he would know about. But the U.S. border is far from that. Far from that. This will be his Nancy Pelosi, we must pass the bill to see what's in the bill moment. Because he has no idea what he's talking about.
You have a wealth of law enforcement experience, obviously battling the Mexican drug cartels. We are getting reports, Steve, that the cartels are very active in human trafficking and bringing these illegals from Central America into the United States. What do you know of this? Just how deeply involved are these cartels?
Well, it's their second greatest source of income other than drug trafficking, human trafficking. And this is certainly an easy money for them, because all they have to do is accept payment down in the Central American countries, and then send their coyotes, their traffickers down there to escort people from point A to point B. And, the sad part of this whole thing is, if you are for secured borders, it appears that you are against women and children, and you're against allowing children to have a better way of life. And nothing could be farther from the truth. But that's the way it's getting painted here, and it's very sad.
Well, the dominant media culture, it's enough to make me lose my voice, Steve, but we heard White House reporters from the alphabet networks constantly refer to moms and kids ad nauseum. And while there are mothers and some toddlers, there's also a significant component, indeed a majority, of these juveniles, males, ages 15 to 18, some of them with gang connections already, some of them being recruited by the gangs. And we're also hearing that no matter the age of these kids, they are being used to smuggle drugs in. We just got a report that heroin smuggled into this country is at an all-time high. Is it coming in directly on these kids?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely it is. Because nobody's searching these kids. Nobody's really spending any time interviewing these kids. You are absolutely correct when you say that the gangs are recruiting these kids, and some of these kids coming in, and I say kids, we're talking young adults. Some of them are coming in and they are already affiliated with gangs. But nobody's allowed to interview them to get any identifying data. Nobody's allowed to do any of that. That is a trafficker's best case scenario.
Perhaps the term we should agree to use is juveniles, so people understand that we're not talking about toddlers and little kids, although they're part of the situation. And we received reports that a 4-year-old sent northward unaccompanied by anybody has been lost, and we can imagine that story sadly will replicate itself. The human toll is excessive, but the threat to our national security, I think you would agree, is profound, especially in the wake of revelations this weekend that TSA is allowing these illegal juveniles to be moved around the country, to be flown to the interior of the country with no documentation in terms of accurate ID. What can you tell us about that?
That is absolutely true and absolutely pathetic. What civilized, industrialized nation in the world accepts undocumented immigrants and then disperses them across the country without any identifying data, with a simple maybe letter saying, on this date, report for your hearing, which nobody will pay attention to. Nobody will come. Of the 50,000 juveniles that came into this country since October, we've deported what, 38 of them? That is ridiculous.
And of course, the administration is claiming that they need to have almost $4 billion, the majority of that money going to, quote, process these children, to get them in front of administrative law judges. Do you expect, given this administration's outlook, that a number of these children will be deported, or instead do you think these administrative law judges will rush forward to say you can stay in the United States?
Oh, almost every one of these children will stay in the United States. Don't think for a second that we're going to be deporting any of them. This is nothing but a ploy, a way of building the administration as a way of creating a bigger bureaucracy so that we can process more illegals to allow them to stay in here without documentation. This is all a front that is part of an agenda which is terribly destroying the backbone and sovereignty of our nation.
And of course, we hear about the Border Patrol agents having to take care of these juveniles, having to tend to, in essence, babysitting duty instead of patrolling the border. I'm curious about the DEA and their situation on the border. Have they been pressed into action? Do you know if more numbers of DEA agents have been dispatched to our southern border?
Well, we've been sending people down on a temporary duty assignment basis, not on a full-time transfer basis. But our focus is the narcotics, not the kids. What we have been involved in greatly is providing intelligence, debriefing informants, interviewing individuals, and then forwarding that information on. Just the other day, EPIC, the El Paso Intelligence Center, a multi-federal jurisdictional intel base run by DEA, submitted information basically stating that the cartels are jumping all over this opportunity to flood the U.S., to flood the border with juveniles, not only carrying drugs, but using them as distractions to allow the real mules, the real drug couriers, to come in the normal courier routes that are no longer manned by the Border Patrol and by immigration.
There is another aspect to this. Well, there's so many, but let's deal with the national security threat. That's not to imply that the importation or the smuggling of drugs across the border is not a threat, but there are other ominous threats in terms of Middle East terrorists groups, others coming into the nation. Has anything been picked up by DEA agents or others about any movements by Middle Eastern groups across our southern border?
Well, a lot of that has been classified information. I wouldn't be allowed to share much of that at all. But the sources that I have, and of course, most of my friends are still with DEA. I still have a lot of active sources with DEA who talk to me freely, many of which live on the border. And there is an open route for not only smugglers, but remember, if you can smuggle drugs into the country, then you can smuggle anything. And if you can take in 50 pounds of pot, you can bring in a weapon of mass destruction. And people tend to forget that. They think we're just focusing on narcotics, but we're looking for all types of contraband that comes into the nation. And we need to get a wall up. We need to secure our borders before we pursue any other administrative route on dealing with who's here. If you can't plug the leaks, you can't bail out the boat.
Steve Peterson, those of us who are classified as border hawks are often criticized for not having a solution. We have about a minute and a half left. So let's hear Steve Peterson's solution. If you had to rank your top 3 priorities to be addressed at once in terms of our southern border, what would those priorities be?
Well, the first priority is to seal the border. So if it requires sending the National Guard down there, send them down. If it requires building a physical fence or wall, we need to build a physical fence or a wall. Like I said, you can't bail out the boat if the water's still coming in. You can't deal with the immigrants that we have in this nation illegally if they continue to flow in unchecked. If we can stop them at the border, then we don't have to worry about identifying them on this side. The problem is we're accepting them in, and then we're dealing with the laws that we have that allow these loopholes to exist to then document people and provide them with hearings. We need to repel them at the border and say, I'm sorry, you have no access, you can't come in. If we can control access to our border like every other industrialized nation in this world, we can control access to our borders, we have a chance of saving our country. If we can't, we have no chance.
Steve Peterson, we thank you for your sobering and honest assessment of what is transpiring on our border, and we look forward to visiting with you again in the not too distant future.
Thank you, JD. I hope you're feeling a little bit better in the future.
We're going to get there, pal. We got to get this border fixed. We want your comments. Why don't you tweet us your comments at Newsmax TV, hashtag America's Forum. You can also go to newsmaxtv.com/comment, and don't forget Facebook.